Tlingit and Haida, Cultural Loss and Artificial Transition by Tanuk Taylor-Neal. Cultural loss has occurred all over the world due to colonialism, genocide, and federal policy. Cultural loss can result in artificial transition because of change that is forced or change that is unnatural or inhumane. The following roadmap is going to guide us through our upcoming information. We're going to begin with a brief introduction to the Tlingit and Haida, moving on to understanding the terms cultural loss and artificial transition. Then we'll look at case studies, historical context, intersectional disconnect, interviews, language revitalization, action research, literature reviews, and our conclusions. Tlingit and Haida. The top right corner features a hand-painted drum by Tlingit artist James Johnson. Below James Johnson's hand-painted drum, which is called Human, is a photo of Haida artist Bill Reed. Bill Reed is pictured sitting to the right of a sculpture he created in the early 90s called Raven and the First Men. The map on the right-hand side of the screen indicates the land origins of several Alaska Native tribes. Both the Tlingit and Haida tribes are located in southeast Alaska, which is the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Haida is located south of Tlingit land. Haida land is indicated with the color-coded dark purple portion of the map. Tlingit tribe is indicated by dark yellow color-coded portion of the map. Again, both tribes are in southeast Alaska. The photo to the left is a beach in Juneau, Alaska. Both the Tlingit and Haida tribes are typically known to be associated with coastal regions. Cultural loss. What is cultural loss? Cultural loss can look like land loss, environmental disruption, assimilation, federal Indian policy, and epistemic action. An example of cultural loss is shamanism in Tlingit practices. Many scholars believe that shamanism is among one of the oldest practices of the world. Shamans have a metaphysical dimension of what exists beyond the physical world. Shamans utilize complex symbols of purpose that operate like deities and laws. Shamans utilize sacred sites. Shamans are generally associated with hunting, fishing, and gathering societies, as well as societies that migrate with seasons for food.
This is a really exciting topic for me, but it's also a very sensitive topic. It's an issue that we still have a lot of conflicts around, particularly with our older population and with those who may be the children of those who suffered from the kind of punishments about practicing our own religion, our own traditional beliefs. And so I want to be, sensitive to those people who might have, feelings of conflict around shamanism. I know it's a topic that our own people don't like to discuss very often. We had a meeting here in this boardroom where actually our Council of Traditional Scholars and really didn't want us to be dealing with it in a very public way, but it was really our younger people who came forward and said, we really want to learn about our traditions, we want to learn about our heritage, we want to learn about our spirituality. And That persuaded our Council of Traditional Scholars to outline the protocols under which we could talk about it, under which we could look at our shamanic objects, and how we could use it to educate the non-native people and the public about our traditions. So I want to.
Tlingit shamanism. Shamanism was once a major component of Tlingit life. Tlingit shamans were persecuted by Russian and American missionaries and government officials. Tlingit people reported cruel torture by the military. Military restraint and challenges with curing new diseases and epidemics from European contact led to the fall of Tlingit shaman. Tlingit shaman assured success in hunting and fishing activities. Tlingit shaman were responsible for maintaining the well-being of their community and clansmen, and they were regarded as military advisors for the community and clans. Artificial transition. What is an artificial transition? Why is it important to label transition as artificial? How have westernized systems, institutions, and influences impacted change and transition for Tlingit and Haida people? How have westernized systems, institutions, and influences impacted change and transition for American Indian people and nations? Cape Fox Corporation versus the United States is an example of artificial transition. Cape Fox Corporation versus United States involved the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Cape Fox Corporation was an Alaska Native village corporation and had selected lands within a national forest for conveyance under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. However, there was an ongoing timber sale contract on those lands between the U.S. Forest Service and a private company. The key issues involved whether the Forest Service could continue the timber sale on the land selected by the Cape Fox before conveying them, and whether Cape Fox had properly waived its right to stop the timber sale by signing a waiver with a typographical error, which the Bureau of Land Management refused to accept. The court ultimately ruled in favor of the United States, allowing the timber sale to continue until the lands were conveyed to Cape Fox. This case exhibited the complex nature between the Native Land Claims Act under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and existing federal land management and resource extraction activities in Alaska. Tlingit shamanism was known to transfer in the maternal line, but paternal succession became evident during population decline and sociocultural changes from Euro-American contact. Tlingit shamanism involved winter ceremonies, which took on a different meaning when Euro-American contact occurred. Many Tlingit sacred objects were lost because of the new religions that condemned Tlingit beliefs. Tlingit shamanism was a group effort, and a lot of contemporary literature insisted that shamanism was an individual pursuit. Slavery in Alaska was almost exclusively a product of indigenous law and customs. This is a quote from a question and answer segment with the Southeast Alaska Heritage Institute. Although we honor our culture, we are not proud of all aspects of our history. We cannot dismiss the reality that slavery was a part of Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian cultures and played a critical role in their development. We have yet to honor Sakwa for having the courage to challenge the practice of slavery and for fighting for his own freedom and that of others held in bondage. Sakwa is our case study for slavery in Pacific Northwest tribes. In 1886, in a federal court in Sitka, Alaska, Sakwa, from the Haida tribe, claimed he was captured by Salish and sold into slavery as a child and trafficked up a Northwest Coast slave trading network. At the time of the trial, Sakwa was enslaved by a Tlingit man in Sitka. Sakwa had come to the American court to seek papers freeing him from his bonds. Sakwa was researched in the early 2010s and written by journalists Jeff Landfield and Paxton Wolber and attorney Lee Baxter. The investigative special feature first appeared on the political news site, the Alaska Landmine, and was reprinted through Southeast Alaska Heritage Institute's Box of Knowledge series. This image to the left is the original longhand transcript of the Sakwa trial in the late 1800s. Part of the transcript reads, "The Indians promised obedience and immediate emancipation to their slaves, and while pretending to obey quietly, removed the greater portion of them to other and distant parts of the country. Now what became of these people? Some were undoubtedly destroyed, but the greater portion were distributed around among other family." End quote. Okay, so this quote is representing that upon Russian and American contact in the Pacific Northwest, there were efforts to try to communicate the illegalization of slavery and its abolishment throughout the United States. And this is saying that that effort was not respected among Native people. So some more context for you. There were not gender norms for slaves in the Pacific Northwest throughout the tribes. When Russian contact occurred, although there is a record of efforts to halt slavery in Pacific Northwest tribal communities, Russian contact actually contributed to more common practices of women slaves being bought and sold as prostitutes. A quote from the Alaska Landmine piece that I mentioned earlier is, "Nearly as much economic importance in coastal Northwest as plantations in the South." So what this is saying is that tribes in Southeast Alaska, well, throughout the Pacific Northwest really, they use slavery in order to maintain their economic stability. The Sakwa case from the late 1800s referenced the Indian Intercourse Laws, the Major Crimes Act, the Crow Dog case, and the 13th Amendment in order to build context for Sakwa's situation and recognizing an ongoing and interconnected occurrence within the Pacific Northwest. The transcript featured cross-examination with Sakwa. 3 of those questions are highlighted here. I think these questions represent the artificial transition because there's some of what was recorded that wasn't recorded fully, meaning there were not proper tools to comprehend all of Sakwa's thoughts, although quite a bit were recorded. The first question highlighted says, "When I sent you from my office to make a demand, and for your freedom, did you do so?" His response was, "Yes. I told you that I was a slave and I wanted a blank from the big chief so I could walk around like any other man." The next highlighted question follows up from where he was taken to when he first entered slavery. "What did they do with you there?" He said, "They made a slave of me. They took me to Stikine River. A portion of that is not in Alaska." Then they asked him what his age was, and his response was, "I don't know my age. White men know their age because they read and write. I know nothing of my age." Okay, we're gonna take a little detour from the Sakwa case to highlight intersectional disconnect within artificial transition and cultural loss. So when I say intersectional disconnect, I mean that sometimes within tribal identity, there are elements of our identity that don't accept everybody within our tribal identity. I say that as an Afro-Tlingit person, and I say that as somebody who's observing the slavery that occurred within our tribe. And the slavery that occurred within our tribe, it was based on class. So the fact that there's not a lot of dialogue and conversation within the tribe about the slavery that definitely occurred for a long time, beyond when slavery was abolished in the United States, I think it means that we're missing an opportunity to be honest with one another and to heal in a practical, meaningful, and intergenerational way. And also, we're failing to acknowledge how parts of our culture resonate with other parts of United States history that some of us grew up thinking that we didn't have anything to do with it. I mean, there are people who have an intersectional identity within a Black identity or within an African identity and a Native or Indigenous identity, but we didn't grow up thinking that there would be potential to have these conversations within the tribe. So this represents artificial transition because we're failing to have dialogue that's needed to heal and to move forward in an efficient way. Moving on, we have a brief interview with my mom, Carla, and my twin sister, Dolores. Carla is pictured on the left, below, and Dolores is pictured on the right. And the image on the far left side is trees in the Tongass National Forest in Southeast Alaska. So we're going to go over all the questions that are going to be asked multiple times. Dolores and Carla are going to receive the same questions. So the first question is, what is an image, memory, or word that represents your identity? What does cultural loss look like in the Tlingit tribe is the second question. Third question, what do you think of when you hear artificial transition? Fourth question, are there moments in history that have impacted your quality of life? Fifth question, what is an effective approach to rebuilding culture? And sixth question, what do you find constructive about the age of information? Artificial intelligence? So the first question is, what is an image, memory, or word that represents your identity? Carla's response was, identity for me is mixed because I'm adopted by white parents and I'm not white. My identity is broad. Identity is culture, but not for me. Carla also chose this image on the right to represent her because of a personal connection that she has to this area in Sitka, Alaska, and because of the scenery. And she took this photo in Sitka, Alaska. The next question was, what does cultural loss look like in the Tlingit tribe? Carla's response was, language arts, dance, beading, making moccasins, weaving baskets, spruce root baskets. It was all lost when I was growing up. White men wanted you to be white. Third question for Carla was, what do you think of when you hear artificial transition? Carla's response was, in terms of culture, throwing away everything you believe in and going into a church. Colonists did this everywhere. I was a junior in college, and we went to Africa. We were indoctrinated into it. Carla also mentions that while in Africa, she was surprised to learn that although colonialism took place in Africa, not all indigenous identities completely lose connection to their practices. Are there moments in history that have impacted your quality of life? Her response to this question was, when I was 5, 6, 7, at school I remember the white kids would make fun of the native kids. As a teenager, cultural studies were brought to the kids. I went to the National Park Services to take a beading class. We had a source of grounding as Tlingits. Now we can learn the language and dance. It's not made fun of. The next question is, what is an effective approach to rebuilding culture? Carla's response was, beading, to dancing, to language. You can't do it all at once. I remember working with an elder leader, and she didn't like my work. She ripped it up because you have to get the details right. The last question for Carla is, what do you find constructive about the age of information and the age of artificial intelligence? Carla's response was, I don't know much about AI, but the age of info I think is very constructive. I was looking for basic formula ideas to make jewelry. I found resources in 15 minutes. It saves time. You can find info, you have to be aware of the sources and where it's coming from. Is the info from native people or outsiders? Moving on to Dolores' questions, which are the same as Carla's questions, but we'll repeat them. First question is, what is an image, memory, or word that represents your identity? What does cultural loss look like in the Tlingit tribe? What do you think of when you hear artificial transition? Are there moments in history that have impacted your quality of life? What is an effective approach to rebuilding culture? What do you find constructive about the age of information and the age of artificial intelligence? What is an image, memory, or word that represents your identity? Dolores said, nothing really comes to mind. Forget-me-not flowers. So the image to the right that's representing Dolores is a bed of forget-me-nots and I believe tulips outside of a beach in Juneau. What does cultural loss look like in the Tlingit tribe? Dolores' response, I'm not really connected with the tribe deeply. From an outside perspective, it doesn't seem like a lot of culture was lost. Some instances, they feel like sellouts. Next question. What do you think of when you hear artificial transition? Dolores' response, artificial intelligence. Are there moments in history that have impacted your quality of life? Dolores says, nothing that I can think of that directly impacts me today. When it comes to the tribe, we have a corporation, but it's commercial. What's good for the brand is not necessarily what's good for the culture. What is an effective approach to rebuilding culture? Dolores' response, more inclusion. The tribe as a whole is gatekeepy. They don't allow access to every native person. If there is more opportunities, it would be better. And finally, the last question for Dolores. What do you find constructive about the age of information and artificial intelligence? Dolores' response, there's more access. Artificial intelligence gives us proof of our development. Artificial intelligence is still being shaped. The way we receive info is changing all the time. More options allow people to get info in different ways. So, an example of momentum within protecting and continuing to rebuild our culture in Southeast Alaska is language revitalization. There are quite a few initiatives at this time. Dr. Lance Twitchell, to the right, is a professor in Southeast Alaska, and he is leading many initiatives with revitalizing our language and protecting it for generations to come.
Day-to-day stuff. Can people talk about all the things they like to talk about in the language? And then reclamation is taking it back for future generations. So again, I said it before, I'll say it again. You are what we need, and you are going to help us to build a future where our languages are a lot stronger, a lot more stable. And we can look at each other as elders of that moment and say, man, remember how close we came? That was scary. But look at us now. Sheesh.
So we saw a couple clips in this presentation, both of which were from a Southeast Alaska Heritage Institute sponsored event. Also, some of our sources are from Sea Alaska Heritage Institute as well. On the screen right now, we have some representations of the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute in Juneau. It just officially opened in 2022, and it was under construction for almost 10 years. But during its construction, there were still quite a few projects and foundational initiatives that were taking place. So our far right image is the outside of Sea Alaska Heritage Institute in Juneau. The middle image is a formline box that exists within the institute, and it's a historical piece that dates back hundreds of years ago, but it's recreated to maintain the practice and to teach future generations. The image on the left is inside the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute. So we talked about language revitalization. We talked about the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute. Some other ways that we're seeing our culture and our land being protected. There is a eelgrass conservation that was conserved in 2014. And on the left is Indian Point in Auk Bay, which was recently added to the National Register of Historic Places. So we're seeing two patches of land, two coastal patches of land in Southeast Alaska that are protected and also used to teach community generational knowledge and to protect that community generational knowledge. Another representation of ongoing initiatives to protect our culture. I had the opportunity to present at the Culturally Responsive Education Conference a couple times within the past 5 years. This image is from the 2023 Culturally Responsive Education Conference. I had a presentation called Mindful Unity. And to the left is the original image that I used to construct the practice of mindful unity. To the right is just an image that Dolores took of me at the conference. My twin sister got this picture. And I bring up this example just to communicate that mindful unity was a concept that I created at the University of California at Santa Barbara. I did not complete the program due to systemic and institutional violence that took place. However, I was able to protect this concept of mindful unity that I started developing in my program. And originally, it was intended to be a teaching curriculum and a teaching practice. And it's evolved into transformative justice and to building community and healing on a collective level and in a constructive manner that creates new paths. You can read more about mindful unity at freedomring.space. Another example of rebuilding culture is a book that was published in 2018 called Potlatch is Pedagogy. This was inspired by Haida's ceremonial practices and provides a model for learning for educators that is holistic, relational, practical, and continuous. This book provides teaching and learning from a different yet complementary perspective to Western approaches to teaching. One of the principles in the book is Principle 2, which says, and I quote, learning emerges from authentic experiences. As much as possible, learning must be made meaningful to students. Project-based learning and inquiry, where the student is at the center of the process and not just focused on the product, are great ways to add authenticity. Another book that recognizes ways to support rebuilding culture and community is They're There. They're There was written in 2018, and Tommy Orange is the author. He grew up in Oakland, California. He's a member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. Tommy recognizes the disorienting experience of living in America as a self-described urban Indian. A quote from Tommy is, cities and towns themselves represent the absence of a homeland, a lost world of buried ancestral land, glass and concrete and wire and steel, unreturnable covered memory. There is no there there.